The forbidden scent of blooming night jasmine, heavy and sweet, clung to the ancient stone walls, mingling with the soft, comforting hum emanating from the royal kitchens. This fragrant veil, however, could not entirely mask the deeper secret that threatened to unravel the very fabric of King Alaric's ancient kingdom. It was a secret woven into the tapestries, whispered in shadowed corridors, and carried on the very air, a silent tension that promised upheaval. Within the opulent but often rigid confines of the palace, Lyra moved with a quiet efficiency, her presence as understated as the gray linen of her servant's uniform. She was young, perhaps 19 summers, with eyes the color of moss after a rain, always downcast, always observing. Her life was defined by quiet duty, scrubbing flagstones, polishing silver, mending torn fabrics. She was just a servant, one of many, yet she held a secret of her own, a hidden birthmark, a crescent moon almost perfectly formed, nestling just below her left collarbone, rarely glimpsed, rarely thought of. Her dreams, much like her existence, were repressed, existing only in the quiet solitude of her attic bedchamber, far removed from the grandeur below. A strange current had begun to ripple through the palace, a disquieting undercurrent that even the lowliest scullery maid could feel. Whispers multiplied like shadows at dusk, speaking of the Alpha King's approaching selection ceremony. He, Alaric, the fearsome and revered Alpha, would soon choose his Luna, his queen, from among the noblest families of the land. The news stirred a potent cocktail of excitement and anxiety among the common folk, and even within the seemingly impenetrable walls of the palace. For Lyra, however, these whispers brought an inexplicable sense of dread, a cold knot forming deep in her stomach. It wasn't merely the awe of such a grand occasion but a profound unease she couldn't quite articulate. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken expectations and the weight of tradition. She heard the kitchen staff speculate about which lady would catch the king's eye, the seamstresses gossiping about the silks and jewels that would be ordered, but Lyra only felt a growing sense of foreboding, a premonition of something vast and unavoidable. Her broom swept across the polished marble, a rhythmic whisper against the encroaching anxiety. The palace, usually a place of predictable routine, now pulsed with an unfamiliar energy, an energy that made her feel acutely visible, despite her best efforts to remain unseen. It was as if the very stones knew something was coming, and she, Lyra, was somehow entangled in its unfolding. The scent of jasmine, once soothing, now felt almost suffocating, a sweet reminder of the world's blindness to the secrets it held. Please subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories, and hit the notification bell, so you don't miss our next adventure. The palace, once merely a backdrop to Lyra's quiet existence, now transformed into a frantic hive of activity. Every corridor buzzed with the hurried footsteps of servants, every chamber echoed with the rustle of expensive fabrics and the murmur of noble voices. Preparations for the selection ceremony intensified daily, turning the usually ordered royal residence into a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Lyra's daily chores, once mundane and repetitive, now brought her into increasingly closer proximity to the royal chambers, her broom sweeping past velvet drapes that concealed secrets, her dusting cloth gliding over surfaces that reflected the grandeur of a world not her own. She saw King Alaric's personal guards more frequently, their imposing figures a constant reminder of the Alpha King's formidable presence, a shadow always looming, even when he was unseen. Each glimpse of their stern faces, each fleeting scent of their wolfish scent, heightened her awareness of the power that resided within these walls, and the man who wielded it. Among the throngs of arriving nobility, one figure stood out, not just for her striking beauty, but for the aura of disdain that clung to her like an expensive perfume. Lady Seraphina, a high-ranking noblewoman, was widely whispered to be the favored contender for the Luna position. Her lineage was impeccable, her gowns magnificent, and her arrogance legendary. Lyra had heard countless tales of Seraphina's cruelty towards servants, her sharp tongue capable of flaying a spirit with just a few choice words. Seraphina viewed those beneath her with a chilling condescension, her eyes like chips of ice, often raking over Lyra as if she were a speck of dust to be flicked away. Lyra was acutely aware of her presence, feeling the invisible weight of her scorn whenever their paths crossed. It was a tangible obstacle, a constant low-level threat that added another layer of anxiety to Lyra's already fraught days. Lyra's primary strategy, therefore, became one of utter invisibility. She moved through the palace like a ghost, her footsteps silent, her gaze averted, her movements deliberate and unobtrusive. She would duck into alcoves, linger in shadowed doorways, and take circuitous routes through service tunnels, all to avoid a direct encounter with Lady Seraphina. She yearned for a life beyond these opulent yet confining walls, a life where her days were not dictated by bells and chores, where she wouldn't have to shrink from the gaze of entitled nobles, where the scent of fear wasn't constantly in the air. She dreamt of rolling hills, of open skies, of the simple freedom of making her own choices. But the reality of her circumstances was a heavy chain around her ankles. She was trapped, bound by duty, by poverty, and by the rigid societal structures of the kingdom. The palace was her cage, albeit a golden one, and escape felt as distant and unattainable as the stars. Each day brought another challenge, another subtle humiliation, another reminder of her place. The upcoming selection, meant to bring stability, instead seemed to amplify every latent tension, every unspoken fear, especially her own. She wished she could simply disappear, become genuinely unseen, a wish that grew more desperate with every passing hour. The subtle humiliations Lyra tried so desperately to avoid soon escalated into more overt and deeply unsettling incidents. Lady Seraphina, emboldened by her perceived status and the approaching selection, began to make a public spectacle of her disdain for the palace staff. One afternoon, while Lyra was polishing a silver tea set in a secluded antechamber, the piercing sound of Seraphina's voice echoed from the main hall. A young scullery maid, barely older than Lyra herself, had accidentally spilt a small amount of wine on Seraphina's elaborate gown. The lady's reaction was swift and merciless. She not only verbally berated the trembling girl, reducing her to tears with cruel remarks about her clumsiness and low breeding, but then demanded that the maid kneel and physically wipe the stain from the hem of her dress with her own apron. The sheer indignity of the act sent a cold shiver down Lyra's spine. Another incident involved a stable boy who was accused, probably falsely, of scuffing Seraphina's riding boots. He was made to stand for hours in the bustling courtyard, holding the boots above his head, a public display of power and abject humiliation. Witnessing these escalating acts of cruelty only amplified Lyra's fear of drawing any attention to herself, turning her already strong desire for invisibility into a desperate plea. She felt a constant knot of anxiety in her stomach, every creak of a floorboard, every distant shout making her flinch. It was during one of the daily royal processions, a ceremonial walk from the king's private chambers to the grand dining hall, that an unsettling moment occurred. Lyra, blending into the line of servants lining the corridor, kept her eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the marble floor, her head bowed in deference. The king's retinue approached, a wave of imposing guards preceding the monarch himself. As King Alaric strode past, his presence a palpable force of power and authority, Lyra felt an inexplicable shift in the air, a sudden piercing intensity. Against her better judgment, her gaze flickered upwards, drawn by an unseen magnet. Just for a fraction of a second, Alaric's own eyes, usually cold and imperious, seemed to sweep over the assembled staff, and for that fleeting instant they connected with hers. There was an unsettling intensity in his gaze, a flash of something unreadable, yet undeniably potent. Lyra felt a shiver, not of cold, but a strange unfamiliar pull, like a distant echo in her very bones. It was a sensation she couldn't explain, a primal tug that left her breathless and strangely disoriented. She quickly averted her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs, convinced she had imagined the connection. Yet the feeling lingered, a ghostly touch against her soul. The unsettling encounter with the king, brief as it was, marked a turning point in Lyra's quiet existence. Her nights, once filled with dreamless slumber, now became restless. She started to experience strange, vivid dreams, fragmented visions that left her feeling disoriented and confused upon waking. The imagery was always hazy, yet profoundly impactful. She saw ancient symbols glowing with an inner light, swirling in a dark cosmic void. Powerful unseen forces moved through ethereal landscapes, and snippets of guttural unfamiliar language echoed in her subconscious. Most disturbingly, there were recurring flashes of intense light, centered around what felt like an ancient marking, a symbol that resonated with a deep, forgotten power, though she couldn't quite grasp its form. These visions were always just beyond her recall when she opened her eyes, leaving only a lingering sense of profound unease and a vague impression of something significant, something powerful stirring beneath the surface of her awareness. She would wake with a gasp, her body drenched in a cold sweat, her mind racing to decipher the meaning of these vivid, inexplicable nocturnal journeys. These dreams, coupled with the king's unsettling gaze, fostered a growing sense of foreboding within her, a premonition that her carefully constructed world of invisibility was about to shatter, that something vast and ancient was slowly, inexorably, reaching out to claim her. Every dawn brought a renewed sense of confusion, a heightened awareness that her life was no longer merely her own. The subtle humiliations Lyra tried so desperately to avoid soon escalated into more overt and deeply unsettling incidents. Lady Seraphina, emboldened by her perceived status and the approaching selection, began to make a public spectacle of her disdain for the palace staff. One afternoon, while Lyra was polishing a silver tea set in a secluded antechamber, the piercing sound of Seraphina's voice echoed from the main hall. A young scullery maid, barely older than Lyra herself, had accidentally spilt a small amount of wine on Seraphina's elaborate gown. The lady's reaction was swift and merciless. She not only verbally berated the trembling girl, reducing her to tears with cruel remarks about her clumsiness and low breeding, but then demanded that the maid kneel and physically wipe the stain from the hem of her dress with her own apron. The sheer indignity of the act sent a cold shiver down Lyra's spine. Another incident involved a stable boy who was accused, probably falsely, of scuffing Seraphina's riding boots. He was made to stand for hours in the bustling courtyard, holding the boots above his head, a public display of power and abject humiliation. Witnessing these escalating acts of cruelty only amplified Lyra's fear of drawing any attention to herself, turning her already strong desire for invisibility into a desperate plea. She felt a constant knot of anxiety in her stomach, every creak of a floorboard, every distant shout making her flinch. It was during one of the daily royal processions, a ceremonial walk from the king's private chambers to the grand dining hall, that an unsettling moment occurred. Lyra, blending into the line of servants lining the corridor, kept her eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the marble floor, her head bowed in deference. The king's retinue approached, a wave of imposing guards preceding the monarch himself. As King Alaric strode past, his presence a palpable force of power and authority, Lyra felt an inexplicable shift in the air, a sudden piercing intensity. Against her better judgment, her gaze flickered upwards, drawn by an unseen magnet. Just for a fraction of a second, Alaric's own eyes, usually cold and imperious, seemed to sweep over the assembled staff, and for that fleeting instant they connected with hers. There was an unsettling intensity in his gaze, a flash of something unreadable, yet undeniably potent. Lyra felt a shiver, not of cold, but a strange, unfamiliar pull, like a distant echo in her very bones. It was a sensation she couldn't explain, a primal tug that left her breathless and strangely disoriented. She quickly averted her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs, convinced she had imagined the connection. Yet the feeling lingered, a ghostly touch against her soul. The unsettling encounter with the king, brief as it was, marked a turning point in Lyra's quiet existence. Her nights, once filled with dreamless slumber, now became restless. She started to experience strange, vivid dreams, fragmented visions that left her feeling disoriented and confused upon waking. The imagery was always hazy, yet profoundly impactful. She saw ancient symbols glowing with an inner light, swirling in a dark cosmic void. Powerful unseen forces moved through ethereal landscapes, and snippets of guttural unfamiliar language echoed in her subconscious. Most disturbingly, there were recurring flashes of intense light, centered around what felt like an ancient marking, a symbol that resonated with a deep, forgotten power, though she couldn't quite grasp its form. These visions were always just beyond her recall when she opened her eyes, leaving only a lingering sense of profound unease and a vague impression of something significant, something powerful stirring beneath the surface of her awareness. She would wake with a gasp, her body drenched in a cold sweat, her mind racing to decipher the meaning of these vivid, inexplicable nocturnal journeys. These dreams, coupled with the king's unsettling gaze, fostered a growing sense of foreboding within her, a premonition that her carefully constructed world of invisibility was about to shatter, that something vast and ancient was slowly, inexorably, reaching out to claim her. Every dawn brought a renewed sense of confusion, a heightened awareness that her life was no longer merely her own. Then came the summons, a crisp official order delivered by a stern-faced senior steward. An event so unusual it sent a fresh wave of panic through Lyra. She was to deliver refreshments directly to the king's private study, a task usually reserved for the most trusted and highest-ranking palace staff. Never a simple kitchen maid like herself. Her hands trembled as she meticulously arranged a silver tray with a delicate teapot, a cup, and a small plate of honey cakes. The anxiety gnawed at her, a cold dread twisting her stomach into knots. Why her? Why today? Every step down the long, echoing corridor felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm, each heartbeat thudding loudly in her ears. The polished oak door of the king's study loomed before her, grand and imposing, a barrier to a world she had only ever glimpsed from afar. She took a fortifying breath, knuckles rapping softly against the heavy wood. A deep, resonant voice bade her enter. The air inside the study was thick, heavy with the scent of old parchment, something metallic, and an overpowering musky aroma that Lyra instinctively recognized as the Alpha King's personal scent. It was deeper, more potent than any she had ever encountered, primal and utterly masculine, filling the small space and making her head swim. King Alaric was initially obscured by the high back of a massive, shadowed chair near the imposing fireplace. As she placed the tray on a low table, her hand, already shaking, brushed against the edge of the cup, sending a small amount of tea sloshing over the delicate porcelain. A tiny hot spill spread across the polished surface. Lyra gasped, her cheeks flushing crimson with mortification. She fumbled for a clean cloth to quickly blot the mess. At the sound of her small mishap, the king rose, his towering form unfolding from the shadows, revealing his intimidating alpha presence. His eyes, the color of molten gold, fixed on her with an unreadable intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. As she knelt, frantically dabbing at the spilled tea, her fingers, still trembling, inadvertently brushed against his hand, which had perhaps moved to steady the cup or perhaps simply to observe. It was only the briefest contact, a fleeting touch of skin on skin, but a jolt like raw lightning coursed through Lyra's entire being, shooting up her arm and igniting every nerve ending. A gasp escaped her lips, half shock, half something else, an unfamiliar sensation that resonated deep within her. She pulled her hand back as if burned, clutching the cloth to her chest. King Alaric, who had seemed utterly composed moments before, stiffened perceptibly. His golden eyes, usually cold and imperious, flashed with an unreadable emotion, a sudden, almost feral glint that sent a fresh wave of terror and an inexplicable fascination through Lyra. The air crackled between them, thick with an unspoken, powerful energy. He said nothing, but his gaze remained locked on her, a silent intensity that promised everything and nothing. The electric jolt of their unexpected touch, though momentary, proved to be a catalyst, shattering the carefully constructed wall of Lyra's anonymity. In that instant of contact, as Lyra instinctively recoiled, the edge of her simple linen sleeve caught on the porcelain tray, slipping upward just enough. It was a negligible movement, yet profoundly significant. The soft fabric exposed a small, pale sliver of skin just above her wrist, and on it, stark against her skin, lay the distinctive curve of her crescent moon birthmark. King Alaric's eyes, already fixed on her with that unsettling intensity, immediately locked onto the ancient symbol, his gaze piercing, almost predatory. The flicker of unreadable emotion that had momentarily crossed his features solidified into something far more primal, something Lyra couldn't begin to comprehend. A low guttural growl, raw and deep, rumbled from somewhere in the king's chest, a sound that vibrated through the very floorboards and echoed in Lyra's bones. It was a sound far removed from human utterance, charged with an ancient power. His pupils, already dilated from the earlier encounter, expanded further until his golden irises were mere rings around cavernous black. An intense, almost tangible wave of recognition, primal and overwhelming, radiated from him, washing over Lyra like a sudden scorching wind. His scent, already potent, intensified, becoming sharper, more animalistic, laced with an undeniable possessiveness that made Lyra's instincts scream both fear and a strange, bewildering fascination. It was as though a dam had burst within him. His inner wolf, usually held in check by centuries of royal decorum and alpha discipline, stirred wildly, clamoring to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged, to claim what it instinctively recognized. The air in the study crackled with an almost unbearable tension, thick with the scent of aroused alpha and the dizzying sensation of a profound, impossible connection. His hand, which had briefly touched hers, now clenched into a fist at his side, trembling with a restrained ferocity. His breath hitched, a faint rasp escaping his lips, as if he were fighting an invisible battle within himself. Lyra, utterly overwhelmed by this sudden, raw display of power and emotion, stumbled backward, her hand flying instinctively to cover the exposed mark on her wrist. Her mind reeled, a chaotic whirlwind of confusion and escalating fear. She had never witnessed such a raw, untamed reaction from anyone, let alone the formidable Alpha King. His eyes, now burning with an unholy light, seemed to bore into her very soul, stripping away all her carefully constructed defenses of invisibility. The primal growl, the expanded pupils, the overwhelming sense of recognition. It was all too much. Her heart hammered. Against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. She could feel the lingering phantom touch of his hand on hers, a tingling sensation that inexplicably sent shivers down her spine, a strange blend of dread and something akin to exhilaration. She wanted only to escape, to disappear into the comforting shadows of the palace once more. Without a word, her movements clumsy in her panic, she backed away, snatching up the silver tray with trembling hands. Her eyes remained locked on his, wide with fright, until she reached the door. She fumbled with the handle, desperate to escape the suffocating intensity of his presence. She retreated quickly, almost fleeing the room, her thoughts a jumble of incoherent fears and questions. Lyra was completely, tragically unaware of the true, ancient significance of her crescent moon mark, and the profound destined impact it had just wrought upon the Alpha King and his fiercely awakened wolf. She simply knew she had glimpsed a power that terrified her, and that nothing would ever be the same again. Her quiet life, her careful invisibility, had just been irrevocably shattered by a single accidental touch. Alaric stood rooted in the center of his study, the primal echo of his internal roar still vibrating through his very bones. His wolf, a creature of ancient instincts and raw power, now raged within him, demanding, urging, almost screaming to claim the fragile servant girl. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to pursue her, to corner her, to brand her as his own. The scent of her fear, mingled with a new intoxicating sweetness, filled his nostrils, pulling at him with an irresistible force. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white, fighting against the overwhelming surge of his own primal nature. This was impossible. He was King Alaric, alpha of the strongest pack in the realm, bound by duty, tradition, and the expectations of his people. He was to choose Eluna from among the noblewomen, a woman of status and impeccable lineage, not a frightened palace servant with a curious birthmark. But his wolf knew no such distinctions, no such duties. It only recognized its fated mate, and it recognized her with an undeniable, instinctual certainty that rattled Alaric to his core. He grappled with the impossible connection, trying desperately to reconcile his alpha duties, his logical mind, with this undeniable, instinctual pull that threatened to unravel his carefully constructed world. His heart pounded with a ferocity that matched his wolf's clamor, a relentless drumbeat against the walls of his reason. The image of the crescent moon mark, stark and luminous on her pale skin, burned behind his eyelids like a brand. It was a symbol he had only ever seen in ancient texts, a mark of legend, a prophecy whispered in hushed tones by the oldest advisors, always dismissed as mere myth. Yet here it was undeniably real on a servant girl. The sheer audacity of fate left him shaken and furious, both with the universe and with himself for this utterly inconvenient, utterly captivating revelation. Meanwhile, news of the king's strange behavior following Lyra's visit spread like wildfire through the palace. Servants gossiped in hushed whispers over laundry tubs, and in the shadowy corners of the kitchens. The royal guards exchanged uneasy glances, noting the king's abrupt dismissal of scheduled meetings and his unprecedented seclusion. "Did you see his face?" one scullery maid whispered to another, scrubbing furiously at a pot. "He looked possessed." Another added, "He sent away Lord Gareth and Lady Eleanor without a word. Said he needed solitude." The flurry of speculation fueled a growing sense of fear among the staff. What could have happened? Why has the king locked himself away? Such erratic behavior was unheard of from the usually stoic and predictable Alpha. Their fear, however, was laced with a morbid curiosity, each trying to piece together the fragments of what they had witnessed or overheard. Lyra, the unwitting catalyst, became the unspoken subject of countless hushed conversations, though no one dared to directly accuse her. The air was thick with rumor and apprehension, making the palace feel less like a home and more like a tinderbox, waiting for a spark. Lyra, for her part, retreated to the safety of her small windowless room, her body still humming with the phantom vibration of Alaric's touch. The memory of his eyes, so intensely golden, and the deep, possessive growl that had rumbled from his chest, replayed ceaselessly in her mind. A strange blend of terror and a bewildering sense of belonging washed over her. She was terrified by his raw power, by the untamed animal that had briefly surfaced in his eyes, but beneath that terror, a tiny, insistent spark of something else flickered, a resonance, a recognition that she couldn't explain. The shock of the incident had left her reeling, yet a persistent, almost magnetic pull drew her thoughts back to the king, to that electric current that had passed between them. She lay on her thin cot, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Why had he reacted that way? What was it about her mark that had caused such a visceral response? The questions gnawed at her, refusing to be silenced. Driven by an insatiable need to understand, a need far greater than her usual caution, Lyra resolved to find answers. She knew the palace library, a vast repository of ancient texts and forgotten lore, held secrets that might illuminate her confusion. Under the cloak of night, when the palace was hushed and most of its inhabitants slept, Lyra would steal away, candle in hand, making her way through labyrinthine corridors. She began to research ancient texts, seeking any mention of symbols, birthmarks, or forgotten prophecies. She pored over dusty scrolls and heavy tomes, her fingers tracing faded script, searching for any connection, any clue that could explain the impossible connection she had felt, and the Alpha King's terrifying, yet strangely alluring reaction to her hidden mark. She felt a growing, desperate urgency, a premonition that her life, and perhaps even the kingdom, depended on her understanding this mystery. The Alpha King, Alaric, found himself in an unprecedented state of internal conflict. His rational mind, sharpened by years of ruling, grappled with the primitive clamor of his wolf. The need for answers, for understanding, became an undeniable hunger. He couldn't risk revealing the true depth of his interest in a palace servant. The political ramifications would be catastrophic, undermining his authority and the stability of the upcoming selection. Yet he had to know. Therefore, Alaric embarked on a subtle, clandestine investigation into Lyra's lineage and history. He summoned his most trusted advisors, men whose loyalty had been forged in countless battles and political intrigues, though he carefully masked his true intentions. He spoke of reorganizing the palace staff records, of verifying birthplaces for efficiency, of ensuring no infiltrators lurked within the castle walls. All plausible excuses designed to extract information about Lyra without raising undue suspicion. His questions were framed generally at first, then became incrementally more specific, subtly steering conversations towards the lower echelons of the palace hierarchy, probing for any mention of unique markings, unusual family histories, or obscure origins among the servants. He had Master Ilara, the palace archivist, review generations of employment scrolls, ostensibly searching for historical staffing patterns, but in reality, seeking any record of Lyra's ancestors and the birthmarks described therein. He even dispatched a few discreet, loyal scouts to the remote village Lyra had mentioned as her birthplace, under the guise of assessing local resources, hoping they might uncover whispers of her family's past that hadn't reached the palace. The king's meticulousness was legendary, but this particular inquiry was driven by a desperate, instinctual need, a primal pull that defied all logic and royal decorum. Every piece of information, no matter how small, was scrutinized, forming fragments of a puzzle he was determined to solve. He would find out who this servant girl was, and why her mark had awakened his dormant wolf. His preoccupation, however subtle he believed it to be, did not go unnoticed. Lady Seraphina, sharp-eyed and ever vigilant in her pursuit of the Luna title, possessed an almost uncanny ability to sense shifts in Alaric's attention. She had meticulously cultivated his favor, believing herself to be the undeniable choice. Now she observed the king's new, unsettling distraction. The abrupt dismissal of his council meetings, the cloistered nature of his study, the subtle inquiries about staff that were strangely out of character, all pointed to a new, unwelcome focus. And Alaric's eyes, she noticed, seemed to stray, however briefly, whenever Lyra, the unassuming servant, was anywhere in his periphery. Seraphina's disdain for Lyra, already simmering, now began to boil over into a potent, corrosive jealousy. She saw Lyra, a mere commoner, as an insult to her own exalted status, a potential rival beneath contempt, yet one who inexplicably held the king's fleeting, dangerous attention. Her cold glances towards Lyra grew sharper, tinged with a malicious resentment. She would often linger in common areas Lyra frequented, her presence a silent, venomous threat, her eyes narrowed in suspicion, trying to gauge the nature of this unseen bond. Seraphina's ambition was limitless, and she would tolerate no impediment, especially not a lowly servant. As the king's hidden investigation slowly unearthed fragments of her past, Lyra's own internal world began to accelerate and intensify. Her dreams, once fragmented and hazy, now became startlingly vivid and coherent, almost like memories. They were no longer mere flashes but elaborate tapestries woven with ancient ceremonies, glowing symbols, and the echoes of powerful resonant chants. She saw women, adorned with similar crescent moon marks, performing rituals under a vast, watchful sky. These dream visions revealed a hidden lineage, a line of powerful women profoundly connected to the moon, guardians of an ancient, forgotten power. The symbols she saw in her sleep began to make sense, connecting to the faint markings around her own birthmark, almost like a map. She started to piece together fragments of a forgotten truth, an ancestral memory stirring within her deepest consciousness. She saw glimpses of a sacred artifact, a moonstone pulsating with ethereal energy, and felt an inexplicable pull towards it. The dreams were exhausting, yet profoundly compelling, leaving her with a sense of purpose she had never known. She was no longer just a servant. She was a vessel for something ancient, something majestic, something that demanded to be remembered and perhaps reclaimed. The next morning, an unexpected royal decree reverberated throughout the palace, shocking the court and sending ripples of confusion through every social stratum. King Alaric, with a gravitas that brooked no argument, announced a significant alteration to the long-established protocols of the selection ceremony. He declared that, henceforth, all women of age within the kingdom, regardless of their social standing or noble lineage, would be required to be present for certain key stages of the process. This unprecedented decision was met with gasps from the noble women and murmurs of disbelief from the courtiers. It dismantled centuries of tradition, throwing the carefully orchestrated event into disarray. What motive could the king possibly have for such a radical change? The whispers multiplied, each offering a different, equally bewildered explanation. For Lyra, the decree felt like a hammer blow. It was an invisible chain tightening around her, pulling her inexorably towards the very spotlight she had so desperately tried to avoid. Despite her every effort to remain an unnoticed shadow, Lyra found herself inescapably drawn into the unfolding drama. With the new royal decree, her status as a palace servant of age meant she was now compelled to attend parts of the selection ceremony. She would be required to stand among the scores of common women, arrayed in simple, undyed gowns provided by the palace, present for the public viewing, for the communal blessing, for the king's initial, sweeping inspection of all available females in his kingdom. The thought filled her with a profound sense of dread, a chilling anxiety that tasted like ash in her mouth. She had spent her entire life cultivating invisibility, perfecting the art of blending in, of being a face easily forgotten. Now she was to be paraded, however briefly, before the very man whose golden eyes had seen through her carefully constructed camouflage, the man whose touch had ignited a frightening, unbidden connection. This wasn't merely participation. It felt like an impending doom, a confrontation she was utterly unprepared for, a destined encounter she had no power to escape. The weight of the king's gaze, the memory of his growl, pressed down on her, an unseen burden. Her increasing visibility, however unintended, did not go unnoticed by her primary tormentor. Lady Seraphina, her features already sharp with jealousy and suspicion, watched Lyra with calculating, venomous eyes. The royal decree, ostensibly broadening the field, had only intensified Serafina's possessiveness over the king, and her conviction that Lyra represented an illicit threat. One afternoon, as Lyra was carrying a basket of freshly laundered linens through a deserted corridor, Serafina deliberately blocked her path, her elegant silks rustling ominously. Her voice, though low, was cold steel, dripping with a condescending sneer. "Well, well, if it isn't the king's newfound fascination," Serafina purred, her eyes raking over Lyra's simple attire. "Quite the elevation from scrubbing floors, wouldn't you agree?" Lyra instinctively clutched the basket tighter, her knuckles white. She kept her head bowed, refusing to meet the lady's gaze, hoping to appease her. "I merely follow the king's decree, my lady," Lyra murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Serafina's smile thinned, becoming a cruel slash across her beautiful face. "Of course. Such obedience. But one must be careful, little mouse. Some heights are not meant for those of humble origins. The air up there can be quite thin. And falling, Lyra, falling can be devastating. Perhaps you should remember your place before it's forcefully reminded to you." Her words were veiled threats, a poisonous warning beneath a veneer of aristocratic concern. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "The king has a discerning eye, but sometimes he needs guidance. And sometimes those who interfere, those who try to snatch what isn't theirs, find themselves lost." With a dismissive flick of her wrist, Serafina finally stepped aside, leaving Lyra trembling in her wake, the weight of the basket suddenly unbearable, the implication of the lady's words chilling her to the bone. The confrontation left Lyra shaken to her core, her anxiety about the upcoming ceremony escalating into outright fear. It was no longer just about avoiding the king. It was now about surviving the wrath of a scorned noblewoman determined to crush any perceived competition. The palace, once a place of mundane routine, now felt like a battlefield, and Lyra, an unwitting combatant. The mandated day arrived, cloaked in a tense anticipation that permeated every corner of the palace. Today was the ancestral ceremony, a pivotal ritual within the selection process, requiring all eligible attendees, whether noble or commoner, to openly display certain marks of lineage. Lyra, dressed in a simple coarse linen gown, identical to 100 others, felt a cold dread settle deep in her stomach. She stood in the vast, echoing grand hall, part of a sprawling sea of women, her head bowed, her gaze fixed on the worn flagstones beneath her feet. She clutched her arm, her fingers instinctively pressing against the telltale crescent moon mark hidden beneath the sleeve, a futile attempt at concealment. She desperately hoped to melt into the anonymity of the crowd, to pass through this daunting inspection unseen, her unique mark remaining a secret. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the insistent beat of the ceremonial drums that had begun to reverberate through the hall. Each beat felt like a countdown to her inevitable unraveling. The ceremony progressed, a slow, arduous procession where each woman, in turn, approached the elevated dais where King Alaric sat, flanked by high-ranking advisors and elders. One by one, they would present their forearm, allowing the royal scribe to verify their family crests, their house symbols, or any other approved marks of tribal belonging. Lyra watched in a daze, her anxiety mounting with every passing minute. Every woman called forward. When the royal scribe's voice finally boomed her name, Lyra, daughter of Alara, a gasp caught in her throat. She stumbled forward, her legs feeling like lead, her vision blurring at the edges. As she slowly ascended the steps towards the dais, her eyes, despite her desperate attempts to keep them lowered, involuntarily lifted, drawn by an irresistible force. King Alaric's piercing golden gaze, intense and unyielding, found her immediately amidst the sea of faces. His eyes, fixed solely on her, held a knowledge, a terrifying certainty that made her tremble down to her very core. She felt a profound sense of inevitability, a surrender to a fate she could no longer outrun. A low, commanding rumble, barely audible over the general murmuring, issued from Alaric's lips, a word that seemed to carry across the vast hall, directed solely at her. Forward. With her heart hammering against her ribs, Lyra reached the dais, her hand instinctively going to her sleeve, intending to offer her other, unmarked arm. But Alaric's voice, now clearer and imbued with an undeniable alpha authority, cut through the din. The left wrist. Her blood ran cold. He knew. With shaking fingers, Lyra slowly, reluctantly, pushed back the coarse linen of her sleeve. It was a movement of profound surrender, a public unveiling. As the fabric receded, the crescent moon birthmark, so long her hidden secret, was fully revealed to the entire court, glowing faintly against her pale skin as if imbued with its own inner light. It was unmistakable, perfectly formed, and utterly unique amongst the mundane lineage marks seen throughout the ceremony. The sight of it, finally exposed, sent a fresh wave of primal recognition radiating from Alaric, his wolf stirring fiercely again, no longer able to be contained. His pupils dilated once more, just as they had in his study, and a possessive triumphant gleam entered his golden eyes. A collective gasp, soft yet distinct, rippled through the hundreds of noblewomen and guards assembled in the grand hall. The murmurs that had filled the air died down, replaced by a stunned silence, followed by a flurry of whispers that grew progressively louder, like a rising tide. Eyes widened, fingers pointed, and shock contorted the faces of many. Lyra saw Lady Seraphina's face contort from disdain to utter disbelief, her jaw dropping open in a silent scream. Alaric's trusted advisors, usually stoic and impassive, exchanged wide-eyed glances, a dawning comprehension slowly spreading across their features. Some of the older court members, those steeped in ancient lore and forgotten prophecies, felt a tremor of recognition, a prickle of unease. They vaguely understood the implications of such a mark, a symbol relegated to myth, now undeniably present on a mere servant. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the sudden disorienting shift in the kingdom's destiny. Alaric, however, stood tall, his gaze never leaving Lyra's mark, a silent, triumphant roar echoing through his very soul. His wolf had found its mate, and the world would now know it. The stunned silence fractured as an elder, revered for his vast knowledge of ancient lore and seldom seen outside his secluded chambers, slowly stepped forward from the king's council. His eyes, clouded with age but sharp with wisdom, fixed on Lyra's arm, then met Alaric's gaze with a profound understanding. The moon-blessed mark, the elder's voice, surprisingly strong despite his years, resonated through the hushed hall, each word carrying the weight of centuries. He began to explain, his voice weaving a narrative of forgotten times, of the moon goddess's chosen lineage, of a prophecy long dismissed as mere myth. He spoke of the sacred union between the Alpha King and the one bearing the crescent moon, a bond destined not just to unite two souls, but to imbue the entire kingdom with unparalleled strength and prosperity. Lyra's mark, he declared, signified her as the legendary moon-blessed mate, the fated Luna, chosen by the very essence of their world, destined for the Alpha King. The revelation hung in the air, transforming the casual observer and the skeptical noble alike into awestruck witnesses of a prophecy unfolding before their very eyes. The elder's words brought clarity to the enigma, connecting Alaric's primal recognition with a sacred, cosmological truth. With newfound conviction, Alaric descended the dais, his steps deliberate and powerful. His eyes, burning with an almost divine light, swept across his court, silencing every whisper, every gasp. He took Lyra's marked hand, lifting it for all to see, his touch gentle yet firm, radiating an unshakable sense of possession and destiny. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the hall, overriding all previous selection protocols, disregarding the expectations of centuries. Today the ancient prophecy awakens, he proclaimed, his gaze settling on Lyra, filled with an intensity that promised devotion and unwavering protection. Lyra, the bearer of the moon-blessed mark, is my destined Luna. She is the one chosen by forces far greater than any earthly tradition or noble decree. The selection ends here. She will stand by my side as queen. His declaration sent a fresh wave of shock through the entire kingdom, visible on every face assembled. It was an unprecedented act, a king choosing a palace servant over every noblewoman, driven not by political alliance or social standing but by an ancient, undeniable fate. It was a moment that would forever be etched into the annals of their history, marking the dawn of a new, unforeseen era. Lady Seraphina, who had watched the entire unfolding drama with increasing horror, now stood utterly defeated, her carefully constructed ambitions crumbling to dust around her. Her face, usually a mask of haughty composure, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. Her features, once deemed beautiful, twisted with a hatred so profound it was almost palpable. The public humiliation, the utter disregard for her noble lineage and her relentless pursuit of the crown, fueled a deep, burning resentment that threatened to consume her. She had been passed over, not for another worthy noble, but for a common, insignificant servant girl. It was an affront to her very being, a wound to her pride that would never heal. Her eyes, now narrowed into venomous slits, bore into Lyra, promising retribution. Serafina clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms, her mind already racing with schemes of vengeance. She would not let this stand. She would not allow a mere servant to usurp her rightful place. This public defeat would not be her end. It would be the catalyst for a hatred so fierce, it would shake the very foundations of the kingdom. Her defeat was absolute, but her spirit, though bruised, was far from broken. She vowed, in the echoing silence of her own seething fury, that Lyra would pay dearly for this unexpected rise, for daring to steal what Serafina believed was rightfully hers. Lyra, the unassuming servant girl catapulted into the dizzying role of prophesied Luna, found herself profoundly overwhelmed by the sudden, drastic shift in her destiny. The weight of King Alaric's public declaration, still echoing in the hallowed halls, felt less like a triumph and more like an enormous burden. One moment she was blending into the shadows, the next she was standing bathed in the harsh, unforgiving light of royal expectation. She struggled immensely with the acceptance of this new, imposing identity. The familiar rhythms of her old life, the quiet duties and predictable routines, had been violently stripped away, replaced by an alien world of intricate court etiquette, political implication, and the daunting responsibilities that came with being the moon-blessed Luna. Doubt, a persistent whisper, gnawed at her. Could she truly fulfill such a monumental role? She, who had only ever known the lowest rung of the palace hierarchy. The sheer magnitude of it all left her feeling adrift, a small boat tossed upon an unpredictable vast ocean. Alaric understood her apprehension, sensing the tremor beneath her outwardly composed demeanor. He saw not just the fated Luna, but the frightened young woman beneath, grappling with a destiny thrust upon her. With a patience that surprised even himself, he personally took on the task of guiding Lyra, dedicating hours each day to her education not just in royal protocol, but in the very heart of their pack. He taught her about their history, tracing the lineage of their alpha kings, sharing tales of their ancestors' struggles and triumphs. He explained the intricate hierarchy, the unspoken laws, and the deep spiritual connection that bound their people. He spoke of the importance of community, of protection, and of the sacred bond an alpha shared with his Luna. He walked her through the sprawling palace, not as a master instructing a servant, but as a mentor sharing vital knowledge, revealing hidden passages and forgotten histories etched into the ancient stones. He showed her the training grounds, the council chambers, the sacred groves where their ancestors had communed with the moon goddess. He demonstrated an astonishing depth of protective affection, a gentle understanding that chipped away at Lyra's fear, replacing it with a burgeoning sense of trust. He spoke of her mark not as a curse, but as a sacred blessing, a direct link to the goddess herself, imbuing her with an innate wisdom and strength she had yet to fully grasp. He helped her to understand the connection their wolves shared, the primal pull that had stunned them both in his study, explaining it as the undeniable resonance of true mates. He was her anchor in the storm of her new reality, patiently answering her endless questions, assuaging her fears, and encouraging her to find her own voice. He allowed her to stumble, to voice her doubts, and always met her with unwavering support. Through these shared moments of instruction and vulnerability, their bond deepened, strengthening with every passing day. The initial confusion and fear that had gripped Lyra began to recede, replaced by a growing connection to Alaric that transcended the physical. She saw beyond the fearsome Alpha King to the kind, dedicated man beneath, burdened by the weight of his crown yet fiercely devoted to his people, and now, to her, the undeniable pull of their fated connection, once terrifying, now settled into a comforting warmth, a sense of belonging she had never known. She started to understand the profound responsibility of her role, not just as Alaric's mate, but as the spiritual heart of the pack, the conduit of the moon goddess's blessing. She began to embrace her destiny, finding courage she never knew she possessed. The moon-blessed mark, once a hidden secret, now felt like a badge of honor, a symbol of her true self, slowly becoming a source of power rather than fear. She was still Lyra, the servant girl, but she was also the Luna, and with Alaric's unwavering guidance, she was learning to become both. Seraphina's fury, festering like a poisoned wound, quickly turned into a cold, calculated rage. The public humiliation at the ancestral ceremony had irrevocably shattered her pride, replacing it with an obsessive desire for revenge. She viewed Lyra's ascendance as an unforgivable affront, not just to herself, but to the established order of the kingdom. This burning resentment led her to clandestine meetings with disgruntled nobles, powerful families who harbored their own grievances against Alaric's rule. Some felt overlooked, others believed the king too progressive, abandoning ancient customs. Seraphina skillfully played on their discontent, painting Alaric's choice of Lyra as a sign of weakness, an unholy alliance, a king driven mad by a commoner's spell. She argued that Lyra, a mere servant, lacked the breeding and political acumen to truly be a Luna, and that her presence would destabilize the entire realm. She also secretly reached out to a rival pack from the Northern Territories, an aggressive, ambitious group known for their ruthlessness and their long-standing animosity towards Alaric's lineage. She promised them strategic advantages, rich lands, and a weakened leadership in exchange for their support in undermining and ultimately overthrowing Alaric and eliminating Lyra. Her conspiracy was meticulously woven, a tangled web of ambition, treachery, and ancient hatred, all aimed at seizing power and restoring what she believed was her rightful place. Subtle, yet increasingly alarming signs of sabotage and unrest began to appear within the kingdom. Farmers reported unusual blight on their crops, far more severe than any natural occurrence. Key trade routes experienced mysterious blockades and unexplained raids, disrupting the flow of goods and creating economic instability. Whispers of dissent against Alaric's rule, once confined to the shadows, grew bolder, circulating among the common folk and even within the lower ranks of the guard. Critical palace supplies, from medicinal herbs to important documents, occasionally went missing, causing minor but frustrating disruptions. There were hushed accounts of strange fires near the kingdom's borders, and reports of small, isolated skirmishes with unknown assailants. These incidents, initially dismissed as unfortunate coincidences or bandit activity, began to coalesce into a pattern, hinting at an organized plot against the king and his new Luna. The kingdom, once stable and prosperous under Alaric's firm rule, now felt a subtle tremor beneath its foundations, a growing unease that permeated the air, suggesting a more insidious planned attack was underway. The seemingly disparate events added up to a growing threat, a shadow spreading across the land, threatening to engulf everything Alaric and Lyra held dear. Amidst this growing unrest, Lyra's newly awakened senses proved to be an invaluable, almost mystical asset. Her connection to Alaric, amplified by the moon-blessed mark, had deepened her intuition, honing it into a finely tuned instrument. She often experienced inexplicable chills, sudden waves of unease, or vivid flashes of imagery that hinted at danger. A strange metallic taste on her tongue would precede a report of sabotage, or an image of shadowy figures would flash in her mind's eye just before news of a border skirmish arrived. She could sense the subtle shifts in the emotional landscape of the palace, detecting pockets of fear, resentment, or deceit where others only saw placid surfaces. Her dreams, once confusing, now offered clearer glimpses into the machinations of their enemies, revealing symbols of the rival pack or the faces of disgruntled nobles, though often cloaked in metaphor. These intuitive insights, initially dismissed as mere anxieties, became increasingly accurate, providing crucial, early warnings that often baffled Alaric and his advisors. She could feel the tendrils of the conspiracy spreading, a dark, malevolent energy that prickled at her skin. Lyra's ability to sense the hidden dangers, to perceive the insidious threats of the plot that others missed, made her an unexpected but absolutely crucial asset in uncovering the burgeoning conspiracy against their realm. Her former invisibility had been replaced by a potent sensitivity, a powerful weapon against the unseen forces working to destroy their future. Lyra's heightened intuition, coupled with Alaric's methodical investigation, began to peel back the layers of deception, exposing the festering core of the betrayal. Her dream visions had grown particularly potent, showing her fragmented scenes of clandestine meetings in a shadowed manner, distinct sigils of the northern rival pack, and the cold, calculating face of Seraphina at their center. She described these dreams to Alaric, her voice trembling with conviction, providing details that matched the intelligence his scouts were painstakingly gathering. Alaric, initially skeptical of prophetic dreams, had by now come to trust Lyra's uncanny insights implicitly. Through meticulous cross-referencing of Lyra's visions with reports from spies and intercepted communications, they slowly unmasked Seraphina's involvement, her bitter hatred now manifesting as outright treason. The extent of her treachery was horrifyingly clear. She was not merely conspiring with disgruntled nobles, but actively orchestrating an alliance with the ruthless northern pack, promising them territories and titles in exchange for their military might against her own people. The rival pack alliance, once a whispered fear, was now a confirmed, imminent threat, poised to strike. The first volley came. Without warning, a deafening explosion that ripped through the quiet dawn, sending tremors through the very foundations of the palace. The outer walls, thick and ancient, shuddered under the impact of siege weapons, a terrifying sound that shattered the morning's peace. Seraphina, leveraging her knowledge of the palace's defenses and Alaric's routines, had opted for a direct, brutal assault. Her allies, the northern pack warriors, a fierce and relentless force, swarmed towards the main gates, their battle cries echoing across the valley. The disgruntled nobles, now openly revealed as traitors, led their own smaller contingents, attempting to exploit perceived weaknesses in the inner defenses. Their intent was clear: to overthrow Alaric, seize control, and plunge the kingdom into chaos with Lyra, the symbol of Alaric's unwise choice, as their primary target. The palace, usually a bastion of safety, transformed into a besieged fortress, its once serene courtyards now a frantic scene of guards scrambling to their positions, archers knocking arrows, and the terrified cries of servants caught in the sudden onslaught. The air filled with the acrid smell of smoke and the clang of steel, a symphony of war that threatened to consume everything. Amidst the chaos and terror of the siege, Lyra, surprisingly, did not cower. Her fear was present, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a surge of purpose, a fierce protectiveness for Alaric and the kingdom she now considered her home. Her innate strength, long dormant, finally burst forth. She had spent a lifetime observing the palace, its intricate passages, its hidden nooks, its vulnerabilities, and its strengths. This intimate knowledge, combined with her intuitive connection to the pack's collective consciousness, allowed her to become an invaluable asset in the defense. As arrows rained down and the sounds of battering rams shook the walls, Lyra moved with a newfound confidence, her mind sharp and focused. She directed frantic guards to forgotten defensive positions, recalling a crumbling watchtower that offered an unexpected vantage point for archers. She guided groups of injured civilians and non-combatant servants through secret tunnels and disguised passages, leading them to the safety of the royal crypts, a forgotten network beneath the palace that only a few truly knew existed. Her intuitive understanding of the enemy's movements, born from her earlier dreams and her heightened senses, provided Alaric with critical tactical information. She felt the weakening of a particular gate just moments before it was breached, allowing Alaric to redirect a contingent of his elite guards to reinforce it, preventing a catastrophic breakthrough. She sensed snipers hidden in the outer forest, their positions too subtle for the guards to easily discern, guiding Alaric's own bowmen with surprising accuracy. Her connection to Alaric, which once provided comfort, now became a psychic link, allowing them to communicate silently, understanding each other's unspoken intentions and fears in the midst of the battle. She was no longer just the destined Luna. She was an active participant in the defense, her presence a beacon of calm amidst the storm, her unexpected strength proving crucial in warding off the initial, overwhelming force of the invaders. The servant girl, once a shadow, was now a shield. The cacophony of battle reached a fever pitch, each clang of steel and roar of a wolf a brutal crescendo in the palace courtyard. This was it, the final confrontation. King Alaric, his fur matted with grime and blood, fought with the primal ferocity of an alpha defending his home. He moved like a whirlwind, a blur of muscle and sword, taking down warrior after warrior from the northern pack. By his side, surprisingly agile and resolute, Lyra moved with a grace born of desperation and courage. She was no warrior, but her presence was a constant, steady flame, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. Her eyes, no longer downcast, scanned the chaos, searching, sensing, guiding Alaric with subtle gestures and urgent whispers born of her heightened intuition. Near the main gate, where the heaviest fighting raged, stood Seraphina, her face contorted in a mask of triumph and malice. She wasn't merely directing the assault. She was actively participating, her dark magic swirling around her, conjuring shadowy constructs that attacked Alaric's loyal guards, enhancing the strength of her northern allies. Her laughter, shrill and venomous, cut through the din, a testament to her unbridled hatred. The fate of the kingdom, of their lives, hung precariously in the balance, swaying with every strike, every fall. Alaric, seeing the devastating effects of Seraphina's dark magic, pushed through the fray, his gaze locked onto his nemesis. He knew he had to reach her, to cut off the head of this viper. But Seraphina anticipated his move, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. She unleashed a torrent of dark energy, a sickly green blast that hurtled towards Alaric, intended to incapacitate him. It was a powerful corrupted force designed to consume life. However, just as the blast reached him, Lyra, driven by an instinct she hadn't known she possessed, stepped forward, her hand instinctively rising, her crescent moon mark pulsing with an ethereal soft blue light. A wave of pure, protective energy exploded from her, a blinding, shimmering shield that met Seraphina's foul magic head-on. The two forces collided with an ear-splitting crackle, creating a shockwave that threw combatants on both sides backward. The air shimmered, the light from Lyra's mark pushing against the darkness. It was a turning point, a revelation of Lyra's true power, a tangible manifestation of her moon-blessed energy. As the protective force emanated from Lyra, it didn't just block Seraphina's magic. It began to unravel it, revealing its corrupted essence. The shimmering blue light bathed the battlefield, and in its pure glow Seraphina's shadowy constructs recoiled, howling in agony as their dark forms dissolved into wisps of smoke. More significantly, the light seemed to strip away the glamour from Seraphina herself. Her face, previously twisted by a hatred she believed justified, now appeared gaunt and ravaged, her eyes sunken, reflecting the true, corrupt intentions that festered within her soul. The pure energy seemed to resonate with the very spirit of her followers, revealing the malicious manipulation and empty promises that had bound them to her. Whispers of doubt began to ripple through the ranks of the northern warriors and the disgruntled nobles. They saw their leader, not as a glorious queen, but as a twisted sorceress, her beauty a facade for a rotting heart. Her own magic, exposed to the pure light of the moonblessed, faltered, weakening visibly, her hold over her allies diminishing with every pulse of Lyra's power. Seeing her magic falter, her followers waver, and her true self exposed, Seraphina shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and despair. Her grand scheme, built on lies and ambition, was crumbling before her eyes. Alaric, seizing the moment of her weakness and distraction, surged forward, his sword a silver blur. He didn't aim to kill, but to incapacitate, to end the threat she posed without sacrificing his own honor. With a swift, precise move he disarmed her, sending her magical staff clattering to the ground, its dark energies instantly dissipating. Stripped of her weapon and her facade, Seraphina stood exposed, her former allies now looking at her with fear and disgust rather than loyalty. The northern pack warriors, witnessing the sudden collapse of her power and the obvious treachery, retreated in disarray, their morale shattered, their alliance with Seraphina proven to be a fool's bargain. The disgruntled nobles, seeing their figurehead defeated and her true intentions laid bare, threw down their arms, their brief rebellion extinguished. Seraphina was defeated, her forces scattered, and her treachery exposed to all, leaving her a pathetic figure, stripped of power and influence, her hateful cries fading into the sudden, eerie quiet of the aftermath. The lingering echoes of battle faded, replaced by the hushed sounds of triage and the grateful murmurs of a kingdom spared. With Seraphina's corrupting influence vanquished and her forces in full retreat, stability slowly, painstakingly, began to return to the beleaguered realm. Alaric, swift and decisive in victory, oversaw the immediate restoration of order. The northern pack, their alliance broken and their retreat disorderly, was pursued to the borders and given a stark choice: pledge fealty and make reparations, or face the full might of their unified kingdom. Having witnessed Lyra's power and Alaric's unwavering resolve, Many chose the former, wary of incurring further wrath. The disgruntled nobles who had allied with Seraphina were stripped of their titles and lands, their betrayal a public spectacle, a warning to any who might harbor similar ambitions. Seraphina herself, her power shattered and her reputation in ruins, was exiled from the kingdom, banished to the desolate northern wastes, a fate far worse than death for a woman obsessed with power and influence. Peace, hard-won and deeply cherished, began to settle over the land once more. Under the united rule of Alaric and Lyra, the wounds of war began to heal, and a sense of shared purpose permeated the air. Lyra, no longer the terrified servant girl, fully embraced her role as Luna. The initial apprehension had transmuted into a quiet strength, a profound understanding of her unique position and the responsibilities it entailed. Her innate compassion, coupled with her rediscovered connection to the moon-blessed energy, allowed her to govern with a wisdom that transcended her years. She worked tirelessly alongside Alaric, her voice calm and authoritative in council meetings, her insights often proving invaluable in navigating complex political and social issues. The people, initially wary of Aluna from humble origins, quickly came to revere her. They had witnessed her courage during the siege, seen the pure light that had emanated from her, and felt the genuine care she extended to every citizen, regardless of status. She walked among them, listening to their grievances, offering solace and inspiring hope. The respect and love she earned was not merely due to her fated bond with the king, but to her own undeniable merit and the strength of her character. The ancient prophecy, once a forgotten myth, had been fulfilled, not just in the union of two destined souls, but in the ushering in of a new era for their kingdom, one marked by justice, compassion, and a rare unity. Alaric would often find Lyra in the royal gardens, tending to the night jasmine, its familiar, sweet scent a poignant reminder of their beginning. He would watch her, a profound sense of contentment settling over him, his wolf purring softly in his chest. Her hands, once callous from scrubbing floors, now often held ancient scrolls or traced the designs of new palace reforms. Her eyes, once downcast, now met his with unwavering confidence and a deep, abiding love. They stood together, two halves of a powerful whole, their bond an undeniable force, visible in the unwavering strength of their rule, and the thriving prosperity of their people. The servant girl, once overlooked, once invisible, now stood as a powerful queen by her alpha king's side. Her crescent moon marked a symbol not just of ancient prophecy, but of a future forged by courage, destiny, and an unbreakable love. They ruled with an unwavering hand, guiding their realm towards a destiny brighter than any had dared to imagine, a testament to the fact that true power lay not in lineage or status, but in the heart and soul chosen by fate itself. The whispers of old of a humble servant had transformed into the proud declaration of their beloved queen Lyra, the moon-blessed Luna. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed Lyra's journey from servant to queen, please subscribe and watch our next story, The Dragon Rider's Secret, coming soon.